Good afternoon. We are continuing with the lecture on the causes of the Civil War, repressible or irrepressible. After the War of 1812, after the Mexican War, we have a situation in which escaped slaves caused enormous political controversy in America. And it's called the Underground Railroad, a brilliant organization set up in the North, employing blacks and whites to free slaves from the South. And the Underground Railroad is an amazing organization set up by Harold Coffin, with Harriet Tubman as maybe the most famous of the people engaged in the practice of stations where you would bring the freed slave to the North, to freedom, in this incredibly well-organized, incredibly courageous organization that put it in the face of whites in the South who didn't want their property taken away, who didn't believe that slaves should or could be free. And that is not part of the Underground Railroad at all. But this very much riled the Southerners, very much got them upset. At the same time, we need to compromise. Remember, expanding territory raises the issue of slavery. America's going to compromise, and the Compromise of 1850 will come forward. That is the old Senate chamber in the United States Congress still. Take a tour, see it. It's an amazing place. And that's where the debates came forward in 1850 to compromise, to take care of the issue of slavery. Now, what were the issues at the time? California's going to come in as a free state. The compromise rises, the need rises because California in the 1849 with the gold rush, with the San Francisco 49ers, California's petitioning to come in as a free state. We have to resolve that unbalancing of the states free and slaves. In addition, what do we do with the Mexican cession? What do we do with the remainder of the land? Texas is slave, California is free. What do we do with the rest of the land in the land we took from Mexico? Further, Texas says its border isn't just Texas, it says its border includes almost all of Oklahoma and Nebraska and New Mexico and Utah and everything. Texans, again, getting a little too headstrong. The capital itself, internationally, we have our nation's capital, where naked African Americans are being, poked and prodded on stage as savages, and that's in our nation's capital. And then finally, the Underground Railroad. What do we do with the slaves free, trying to be free, going up north? This compromise must deal with these 5 issues. Now, what happens is that the old guard, Daniel Webster, Henry Clay, John C. Calhoun, try to come up with a compromise, and it does not work. Those 3 great triumvirate men cannot get a bundled compromise like 1820 through the Senate, through the new factional situation, and thus the new guard, William Seward and Stephen Douglas. They are the ones who are going to come up with a compromise. Now, something has to happen before. You saw the old Senate chamber where all these debates were taking place, and the compromise relies upon that individual. The key event is that Millard Fillmore, yes, the greatest name in American political history. Hi, I'm Millard Fillmore. Hi. Isn't that a great name? Think of being named Millard Fillmore. The Vice President of the United States becomes President of the United States. And that event is what allows for the Compromise of 1850. Because without it, Zachary Taylor, slave owner, Whig, incompetent president, would have vetoed any and every measure coming out of the Senate that we needed for compromise. The fact is, Zachary Taylor does one thing as president. From 1848 to 1850, he dies. Without his death, Millard Fillmore would not be President of the United States, and Millard Fillmore had been listening to the brilliant arguments of the old guard and the new guard, appreciated them and said, we will indeed have compromise. I will sign the compromise. Thank goodness for Millard Fillmore. Thank goodness for him, because he allows us to stay as a nation, stay as a union, for those crucial 10 years. So Millard Fillmore signs the bundle of compromises. This is not one bill. This is Henry Clay speaking on the floor of the Senate with Daniel Webster right there, with Millard Fillmore presiding, and with John C. Calhoun looking on. The bundle of compromises that come forward is the Compromise of 1850. And what are they? California, of course, comes in as a free state. Number two, popular sovereignty. We knew that yesterday, or today actually in class. Let the people decide for the next concession. Seemingly great for the South, opens up Arizona and New Mexico territory. But are we really growing cotton in that territory, in the godforsaken desert of the American Southwest? No. So it's really not a victory for the South at all. Texas size was reduced, kind of another defeat for the South on that basis. And then Washington, D.C., the compromises had no slave trade. But you can still own a slave in the nation's capital. You just can't buy and sell them like pieces of meat up on an auction block. And then the feature of the Compromise of 1850, which would solve the issue yet cause the Civil War, is the Fugitive Slave Act. It is incorporated in, and throwing the weight behind it are certain northern senators like Webster who say we have to have this as part of the compromise to appease, to take care of the Southerners, and it goes forward, and boy, is it an interesting act. You have black men being free, you have black men going north, and the provisions of the Fugitive Slave Act. All a slave owner has to do is go into a southern federal court in the South and say, my slave has escaped. His word is taken as gospel. Number two, everything happens because the federal government will now be involved in hunting down slaves. The institution of the nation is now working on behalf of the southern slave owner. That illegality will become, whoa, it's illegal to harbor a slave. It's now a federal crime to harbor a slave. And the adjudication, once the slave is found, is not to whether he was actually a slave. It's simply to what? Is the guy who the southern slave owner says he is. And guess what happens when you go to court? You get no jury, no witness. You can't have the rights of enshrined in American and British history of bringing witnesses and having juries to decide your case. And guess what? The magistrate deciding the case gets $5 to get the guy, let's set the guy free, and $10 to send him back to slavery in the South. Needless to say, and this is where I wish, Matty Froling were in front of me, because I'd take a book and I would say the issue of slavery is now put into the face of everybody in the North, because you cannot ignore slavery because it is placed in front of you. The government is taking its long tyrannical arm and enforcing the will of Southern slavery types in your backyard in the North. And the protests are enormous. Everyone got it? So the Compromise of 1850 works. Millard Fillmore works perfectly to keep us out of war. But one of the provisions is extraordinarily problematic. And published that same year in 1851 is something that keeps us. You want to know about taking the issue and putting it in your face? Well, guess what novel puts it in your face? It's called Uncle Tom's Cabin. And it's not in the PowerPoint, but Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe will popularize the issue of slavery so much that with the Fugitive Slave Act and Uncle Tom's Cabin, it's now a moral cause starting in 1851 for all the people in America. Of course, the 1852 election comes along, and what are we going to do? We're going to nominate a Northerner who supports slavery. And the Democrats are going to put forward a guy named Franklin Pierce. Again, a World War. Mexican War hero Franklin Pierce was supposedly a general, but everybody knew he was not, and he was in fact a worse drunk than Zachary Taylor. So Franklin Pierce, the Democratic candidate, is known as a bachelor, womanizing drunkard, and the hero of many a well-fought bottle, not battle. And so Franklin Pierce will get the Democratic nomination. The Whigs will come forward and go, oh, we got to nominate a general. Who else can we nominate besides Zachary Taylor, who died? We'll get Winfield Scott, the guy who invaded Mexico City, and Franklin Pierce will win. Again, a Vermont Northerner who supports slavery. What he does from 1852 to 1856 as president really is problematic for the American Civil War. And what does he do? He wants expansion. And the expansion that he wants is to go get land. Don't worry about William Walker. Don't worry about the Clinton-Bulwer Treaty. Don't worry about sending Commodore Perry to open up Japan. That was big in world history last year. Worry about the Ostend Manifesto, because in 1854, he will go and try to get Cuba. Oh, Cuba, 90 miles off of Florida, slave thing, owned by Spain. We took Mexico and got it in Texas and California. Let's go get Cuba from Spain. And he sends a representative over to Ostend, Belgium, and there the whole episode becomes public, blows up in Pierce's face, and what do we have? We have the Ostend Manifesto, almost as good as the Wilmot Proviso, Proviso, Fascism. The Ostend Manifesto is that event which says we are trying to expand, slave power is trying to expand, and we stop the president in the nick of time from buying Cuba and putting more slavery into the United States. He also does the Gadsden Purchase. Near and dear to my heart is the Gadsden Purchase, because that area of land down there in southern Arizona and New Mexico is purchased in 1853, so as to bring Tucson into the nation, which is where my grandparents met, married, and had Tom Burroughs in 1928 as their son. That Gadsden Purchase is purchased for one reason, and one reason alone. Why? Because of the Guadalupe Mountains at El Paso, the pass, is the route going from Texas out to California for what? The proposed transcontinental railroad. And the southern-leaning Pierce says, let's purchase it so El Paso can become part of the United States, and we can run a line from Houston all the way out to California and have the economic activity, the hub in the south. All the trade with the West will come through the south. Great idea. Thank you. Tucson's now part of the United States. But who's going to go crazy? Yes, that man who does not look anything like me at all. His name is Stephen Douglas. The new guard in the Compromise of 1850 now will do something that will forever change the United States. He will seek the Kansas-Nebraska Act. He wants the railroad to go from Chicago, Illinois, where he sits on the board of directors of 2 railroads and owns major part of a third. He says, no, that railroad going out west is going to go from Illinois west, not from the southwest. And you can't see it on the thing there, but maybe you can. But if you go from Illinois west, you're going to go through unincorporated Nebraska territory. And the unincorporated Nebraska territory will come in under the Missouri Compromise as free. Southerners won't go ahead with that incorporation of that territory, so he changes the nature of the game. He wants the Trumps getting on a railroad. He goes, guys, let's change the Missouri Compromise and make the Kansas and Nebraska territories 2 of them. And let's change forever free out there to popular sovereignty. And wink, wink, nudge, nudge. If you look, Kansas will be next to the Missouri. It will come in as a wink, wink, nudge, nudge slave state. And Nebraska will come in as a free state if we just allow for popular sovereignty. And what has he done? He has taken the art of compromise and thrown it out the door. And he's taken the Missouri Compromise and thrown it out the door. What he's done is taken the compromise that's kept us together as a country, and with the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854,